The first time my daughter-in-law humiliated me, I convinced myself she was only trying to impress her friends. The second time, I blamed the stress of her demanding career. By the third, I realized I had spent nearly 2 years making excuses for someone who saw kindness as weakness. That Friday evening, I stood on the terrace of a breathtaking oceanfront villa in Malibu, balancing a tray of grilled appetizers I had prepared from scratch. The golden California sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, while expensive music drifted through hidden outdoor speakers. Every guest wore designer clothes, laughed loudly, and carried sparkling champagne as if life had never introduced them to hardship. My son, Mason Brooks, sat beside his wife, Sabrina Cole, at the center of the gathering. Sabrina had organized the celebration for her 31st birthday, inviting coworkers from the prestigious luxury real estate agency where she dreamed of becoming a senior partner. She looked completely at home among wealthy clients and ambitious professionals. I, however, was invisible. "Could someone bring another bottle?" one guest called. "I'll get it," I replied before anyone else could move. As I turned toward the kitchen, Sabrina raised her crystal glass with a playful grin. "If you can't handle my world," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you can always go back home." The table erupted with laughter. Someone chuckled into their drink. Another whispered, "She's savage." I looked toward Mason. He didn't laugh. He didn't defend me either. Instead, he stared at his phone as though reading something incredibly important. That silence hurt far more than Sabrina's words. I placed the serving tray gently on the marble table, smiled politely, and simply said, "You're right." Nobody noticed the meaning behind those 2 quiet words. They assumed I was embarrassed. They believed I'd accepted my place. Only I knew a decision had already begun forming inside me. Months earlier, Mason had called me sounding desperate. "Mom, this opportunity could change everything." He explained that Sabrina's clients expected successful agents to live in prestigious neighborhoods. Their current apartment wasn't impressive enough, and losing wealthy buyers could cost her promotions. "I hate asking," he admitted, "but could you help us with the lease deposit? We'll never forget it." I had spent 33 years working as a public school principal in Ohio. My late husband and I had saved carefully, avoiding debt and unnecessary luxuries. After his passing, those savings represented security for my retirement, yet Mason was my only child. Without hesitation, I agreed. The transfer totaled $40,000, covering the security deposit and several months of rent for an upscale Santa Monica condominium. My attorney handled the funds through an escrow account until the lease became official the following Monday. I believed I was investing in my son's future. Standing in that Malibu villa, I suddenly realized I had been financing an illusion. The party stretched long into the night. Around midnight, guests wandered through the house taking photographs beside expensive artwork they assumed belonged to Sabrina. They didn't know everything inside had been rented for the weekend. By 2 o'clock, laughter finally faded. I quietly washed the last dishes, while Mason and Sabrina disappeared upstairs without saying goodnight. The house became silent except for distant waves crashing against the shoreline. I carried my suitcase onto the guest room bed and sat motionless. For months, uncomfortable memories replayed through my mind. Sabrina correcting the way I dressed before dinner, rolling her eyes whenever I mentioned my teaching career, introducing me as Mason's mother from Ohio instead of using my name, asking whether I really needed to fly business class because retirees should save money. Every insult had been small enough to ignore. Together, they formed a painful truth. I opened my laptop. The escrow account still showed the transfer as pending. Nothing had been finalized. Legally, I could still cancel the payment before Monday morning. I stared at the screen for nearly 20 minutes. My heart argued with my head. A mother wanted to protect her son. A woman demanded to protect herself. Finally, I opened a new email. "Please cancel the pending transfer immediately and return all funds to my account," I wrote to my attorney. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I clicked it, there would be no turning back. I thought about Sabrina's laughter. I thought about Mason's silence. Then I pressed send. The email disappeared, so did years of guilt. Before sunrise, I booked the earliest flight back to Ohio, zipped my suitcase, and quietly slipped out through the back door. No dramatic goodbye, no angry note, no confrontation, just one calm decision. By the time anyone realized I was gone, the future they had counted on was already beginning to disappear. Monday morning arrived with an unusual sense of peace. For the first time in months, I woke in my own bed without worrying whether I had said the wrong thing or offended someone who never intended to like me in the first place. The familiar sounds of birds outside my Ohio home replaced the crashing waves of Malibu. I watered the flowers my late husband had planted years ago, brewed fresh coffee, and tried to settle into a normal day. My phone remained face down on the kitchen counter. I already knew what was coming. At exactly 10:18 a.m., it began vibrating nonstop, one missed call, then another. Within 15 minutes, I counted 12 calls from Mason and 6 from Sabrina. There were text messages, too. "Mom, please answer. It's urgent, call me immediately." "The broker says something happened with the payment." I took another sip of coffee before answering. "Good morning, Mason." His breathing sounded frantic. "Mom, what happened?" "What do you mean?" "The escrow company canceled the transfer. The landlord gave the condo to another applicant this morning. We lost the apartment." "I know." Silence filled the line. You know?" "Yes, you canceled it?" "I did." His voice rose instantly. "Why would you do that?" "We were depending on that money." I remained calm. I was also depending on being treated with respect. Before Mason could respond, I heard Sabrina shouting in the background. "Give me the phone!" A second later, her voice exploded through the speaker. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I believe I do." "You embarrassed us." "No," I answered quietly. "You embarrassed yourselves." My managing partner already knew we were moving into that building. Our housewarming invitations are printed. Clients are expecting us there. I leaned back in my chair. "Then perhaps those promises should have been made after the lease became yours." "You ruined my career." "I didn't." "You absolutely did." "No, Sabrina. I simply chose not to finance it anymore." She let out an angry laugh. "So this is revenge?" "No. Then what is it?" "A boundary," she scoffed. "You've always hated me." "I never hated you. You've been waiting for an excuse. I've been waiting for respect." Another pause. Then she lowered her voice. "Families help each other. They do. So help us. I already tried. For one stupid joke, you're throwing away your son's future?" "It wasn't one joke." "What are you talking about?" "It was every comment about my clothes, every remark about my hometown, every time you introduced me without saying my name, every dinner where I was treated like hired help instead of family. You tolerated all of it because I loved my son." And Friday night showed me nothing would ever change. The line became quiet. For the first time, Sabrina had no immediate response. Finally, Mason spoke. "Mom, we really needed that apartment." "I know. We can't afford another place like it." "I know. Then why didn't you tell us first?" "Would it have changed anything?" Neither answered, because they both knew the truth. It wouldn't have. The rest of the week passed surprisingly peacefully. I ignored dozens of missed calls and focused on rebuilding the life I had neglected. I attended my neighborhood book club for the first time in nearly 8 months. My friends welcomed me as though no time had passed. I spent Saturday morning working in my garden, planting fresh roses where old shrubs had died during winter. Every evening felt lighter. It amazed me how exhausting people could become when you constantly sought their approval. On Thursday afternoon, Mason called again. This time his voice sounded completely different, soft, tired. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course." There was a long silence. "We're in trouble." I waited. "Sabrina lost one of her biggest clients." "I'm sorry to hear that." "She promised she'd be hosting private events in Santa Monica. And now?" "The client signed with another agent." He sighed deeply. "Things at work are really bad." I felt sympathy, not satisfaction. There was an important difference. "I'm sorry she's struggling," I said honestly, "but those were decisions she made." "I know." Another silence, then came the sentence I never expected. "She wants me to stop speaking to you." My heart tightened. I see, she says if you won't help us financially, then you're choosing money over family. And what do you think? I don't know anymore. I closed my eyes. For years, I had protected Mason from disappointment. Now life itself was asking him to choose between honesty and comfort. Mason, yes, I love you more than anything. I know. But loving someone doesn't mean rescuing them from every consequence. I understand. If you decide to stop talking to me because someone demands it, I'll accept your decision. His breathing grew heavier. But I won't buy back a relationship with my savings. The words lingered between us. Quiet, painful, true. Finally, he whispered, she wants all of us to have a video meeting this weekend. What for? She says we need to work out a compromise. I looked through my kitchen window toward the blooming roses outside. I'll join, but only if everyone agrees to tell the truth. Mason exhaled slowly. I'll let her know. When the call ended, I had a feeling that the conversation waiting for us on Saturday would change far more than anyone expected. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies over Ohio. I carried a cup of tea into my home office and opened my laptop 5 minutes before the scheduled video meeting. My stomach wasn't filled with anxiety anymore. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: certainty. At exactly 10 o'clock, the screen came to life. Mason appeared first, sitting quietly on a worn-looking sofa inside the apartment he shared with Sabrina. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes, and his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. A moment later, Sabrina joined him. She wore a crisp white blazer and a practiced smile that looked more appropriate for a business presentation than a family conversation. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said pleasantly. "Good morning. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." I agreed because Mason asked. She nodded politely. "I've spent the past week reflecting on everything that happened in Malibu. I hope that reflection was helpful." It was. I realize emotions were running high, and perhaps my birthday celebration wasn't the best environment for everyone. I noticed she still hadn't admitted responsibility. She continued, "I think we've all said things we regret." I folded my hands together. "I don't remember insulting anyone." Her smile tightened. "I meant misunderstandings happen." "It wasn't a misunderstanding." She hesitated. "What happened was public humiliation." "I didn't mean it that way." "You meant every word." The room became quiet. Sabrina inhaled slowly before changing tactics. "Regardless of the past, I'd like us to focus on moving forward." "I'm listening." "Our financial situation has become challenging." Mason kept his eyes lowered. "We've located another apartment." She pulled a folder into view. "The monthly rent is lower than the Santa Monica property, and we've negotiated favorable lease terms." I remained silent. "We're not asking for a gift." She slid several papers toward her webcam. "This would be a formal loan agreement. You could charge interest if you'd like." I looked at Mason. "Have you read those documents?" He nodded. "Yes. And do you fully understand them?" "I think so." I turned back to Sabrina. "Whose idea was this?" She answered immediately. "Mine." I thought so. She forced another smile. "Eleanor, families support each other. This arrangement protects everyone. It protects you. It protects all of us." "No." I shook my head gently. "It protects a lifestyle you still cannot afford." Her patience began slipping. "This apartment costs less. Can you comfortably pay for it without borrowing money?" Silence. That answer told me everything. "I'll take that as a no." Mason finally spoke. "We were hoping things would improve once Sabrina closes a few more sales." "Hoping isn't a financial plan," I replied softly. "You always think the worst," Sabrina snapped. "No, I prepare for reality." She leaned closer to the camera. "You don't understand how this industry works." "You're right, I don't. But I understand debt, I understand budgets, and I understand the danger of building a life around appearances." Her expression hardened. "You've never believed in us. I believed enough to offer $40,000. She looked away. "You took that away." I chose not to finance disrespect. Frustration flashed across her face. "So that's it? Yes. You won't help your own son?" "I am helping him." She laughed bitterly. "By saying no, sometimes that's the most valuable answer." Sabrina stood from the sofa and began pacing across the room. I apologized. You offered carefully chosen words. I said I was sorry. You said you were sorry I was offended. She stopped walking. Those aren't the same thing. Her jaw tightened. What exactly do you want from me? Nothing. There has to be something. There isn't. You want another apology? No, you want me to admit I was wrong? Only if it's true. She stared into the camera for several long seconds. Then she quietly said, I don't think I did anything that serious. There it was, the truth, not the polished version, not the rehearsed one, the real answer. I nodded. Thank you. She frowned. For what? For finally being honest. Confusion crossed her face. I wasn't asking for an apology. I was hoping for accountability. Before she could answer, Mason suddenly spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight I hadn't heard before. She's right. Sabrina turned toward him. What? My mom. He looked directly into the camera. She's right. Sabrina blinked in disbelief. Mason, I should have defended her that night. Mason, stop. I stayed quiet because I was afraid of upsetting you. His breathing became uneven. I kept telling myself we'd eventually pay Mom back. But the truth is, he rubbed his forehead, we were never close to being able to afford that lifestyle. The room fell completely silent. For the first time since the meeting began, Sabrina had no response. And I realized the conversation had just taken a turn neither of us could have predicted. Sabrina stared at Mason as though she no longer recognized the man sitting beside her. What did you just say? She asked quietly. He swallowed hard. I said Mom was right. No. She shook her head. Tell me what you just said before that. Mason let out a slow breath. We couldn't afford that life. The words hung in the air. Sybil, honest, impossible to take back. Sabrina crossed her arms. So now you're blaming me? I'm blaming both of us. No, you're blaming me. I'm blaming every decision we made, trying to look richer than we actually were. She laughed bitterly. That's unbelievable. It isn't. Mason finally looked directly at her. We've been living paycheck to paycheck for almost a year. We're building a future. We've been borrowing from it. You knew what our goals were. I also knew our bank account. The room became painfully quiet. I didn't interrupt. This conversation no longer belonged to me. Sabrina pointed toward the screen. Your mother filled your head with this. No, she turned you against me. She didn't have to. His voice remained calm. I've been lying to myself long before Malibu. He leaned forward. I maxed out 3 credit cards. Sabrina's expression changed. Mason, I never told you because every time I tried to slow us down, you said success required sacrifice. It does. Not this kind. He opened a drawer beside the couch and pulled out several envelopes. I've been hiding these. She frowned. What are those? My credit card statements. He held them toward the camera. I owe more than $30,000. Her face turned pale. You said the balances were manageable. I lied. You lied to me? I was ashamed. Sabrina slowly sat back down. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, she whispered, Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd tell me to keep pushing. He rubbed his eyes. You always believed the next commission would fix everything. And I wanted to believe it too, but it never happened. I watched my son with a mixture of sadness and pride. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. Sabrina suddenly looked at me. Are you happy now? No. You got exactly what you wanted. I never wanted this. You wanted to prove us wrong. I wanted both of you to stop hurting yourselves. She shook her head. You don't understand ambition. I understand sacrifice. My husband and I spent decades saving for retirement. We delayed vacations, we drove older cars, we lived within our means. None of it was glamorous. But it gave us peace. She looked away. That's not the life I wanted. I know, but the life you wanted shouldn't require someone else's savings. Another long silence followed. Mason finally spoke again. I'm tired. Sabrina looked at him. What do you mean? I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of worrying every time my phone rings because it might be another bill collector. I'm tired of buying things we can't afford just so strangers think we're successful. His voice cracked. And I'm tired of expecting my mother to rescue us every time our choices catch up with us. A tear rolled down Sabrina's cheek. She quickly wiped it away. So what are you saying? I'm saying we need to start over. She stared at him. In a cheaper apartment? Yes. With old furniture? Yes. And no luxury neighborhood? Yes. She laughed through her tears. My clients will judge me. The right clients won't. They all judge. Then find better clients. She lowered her head. I've spent years building this image, and it's exhausting you. She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly asked, what happens if I can't let go? Mason closed his eyes for a moment before replying. Then I don't know how we keep doing this. The words hit her harder than anything else said that morning. She looked at him with disbelief. Are you talking about us? I'm talking about our marriage. Another heavy silence settled over the call. I wished I could erase their pain, but I also knew some conversations couldn't be avoided forever. Mason turned back toward me. Mom, yes? I'm sorry. You've already said that. I know, but I need you to hear something else. He took a deep breath. You spent your entire life protecting me, and somewhere along the way, I started believing that was your responsibility instead of your gift. My eyes filled with tears. I should have appreciated everything you did. I should have defended you, and I should have never allowed anyone, including my own wife, to make you feel small. I smiled gently. Thank you, he nodded. I don't expect the money. I don't deserve it. I just hope someday you can trust me again. You never lost my love, Mason, only my confidence, and confidence can be earned back. For the first time that morning, a faint smile appeared on his face. It wasn't the smile of someone who had solved every problem. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped running from the truth. The meeting ended a few minutes later. No one shouted. No one slammed a laptop shut. We simply said goodbye as my screen went dark. I had a feeling that this wasn't the end of our family's story. It was the beginning of a completely different chapter. 6 months passed more quickly than I expected. Autumn settled across Ohio, covering the streets with golden leaves and crisp morning air. My little house felt peaceful again. I spent my afternoons volunteering at the local library, tending my garden, and enjoying quiet evenings with neighbors I had unintentionally neglected while trying to solve problems that were never mine to fix. Life had become wonderfully ordinary. One Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Mason. Mom? His voice sounded lighter than it had in years. Good morning. I wanted to ask you something. I'm listening. Would you mind if I came home for Thanksgiving? A smile spread across my face. I'd love that. I'll bring dessert. You don't have to. I know. I want to. When he arrived a few weeks later, I noticed the difference before he even stepped out of his car. The expensive luxury SUV was gone. Instead, he drove a modest used sedan with over 100,000 miles on it. He looked healthier too, less polished, more peaceful. As soon as he walked through the front door, he wrapped me in the longest hug we'd shared since his father passed away. I'm sorry it took me so long to grow up, he whispered. I hugged him tighter. You're here now. That's what matters. Over dinner, he told me everything. A month after our video meeting, he and Sabrina had separated. There hadn't been one dramatic fight, no screaming, no betrayal. Just the painful realization that they wanted completely different lives. Sabrina couldn't let go of the image she had spent years creating. Mason could no longer afford to chase it. Eventually, they agreed that staying together would only make them resent each other. The divorce had been respectful, though heartbreaking. I still hope she finds happiness, Mason said quietly. So do I. She wasn't a terrible person, no. She just believed success had to look a certain way. He nodded. And I believed it too. His own life looked very different now. He rented a small one-bedroom apartment near his office. He sold unnecessary furniture, canceled expensive memberships, started cooking his own meals. Most importantly, he met regularly with a financial counselor who helped him create a realistic budget. I've already paid off 2 credit cards, he said proudly. That's wonderful. It feels slow. The best progress usually is. He smiled. I finally sleep through the night. Those words meant more to me than any promotion or luxury apartment ever could. Peace was something money could never buy. After Thanksgiving dinner, we sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets. Watching the last orange leaves fall from the maple trees, Mason looked across the yard before speaking again. "You know, I used to think saying no meant someone didn't love you." I listened quietly. "But now I think the opposite can be true." "How so?" "If you had given us that money, I would have stayed exactly the same." He laughed softly. "I probably would have asked for more eventually. I didn't deny it, because I knew he was right. I was becoming dependent, not just financially. I depended on you to fix every difficult situation, and that's not what parents are supposed to teach." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Parents spend years teaching children how to walk. The hardest part comes later, when we have to step aside and let them walk alone." He nodded slowly. "I understand that now." A few days after he returned home, a handwritten envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a simple note. "Mom, thank you for loving me enough to disappoint me. At the time, I thought you were taking something away from me. Now I realize you were giving me something I should have learned years earlier: responsibility. You didn't save my lifestyle, you saved my future. I hope one day I'm the kind of man Dad would be proud of. Love, Mason." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same wooden box where I kept old photographs of my husband. He would have been proud already. Not because our son had become wealthy, not because he'd finally achieved professional success, but because he had chosen character over appearances. Looking back, I often think about that warm Malibu evening. At the time, Sabrina believed she was asking me to leave a world I couldn't understand. The truth was far simpler. It wasn't my world to begin with. Real success isn't measured by expensive neighborhoods, designer clothes, or the opinions of strangers. It's measured by integrity, gratitude, and the courage to live honestly even when honesty costs you comfort. Walking out of that villa before sunrise felt like losing my son. Instead, it became the first step toward finding him again. Sometimes love isn't expressed through another check, another rescue, or another sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest act of love is quietly saying no, allowing consequences to teach the lesson that endless generosity never could. And as I locked my front door that evening, I realized I hadn't just protected my retirement. I had protected my self-respect. In the end, that turned out to be the greatest gift either of us could have received.